the man who wrote and recorded Oh Happy Day, Mr. Edwin Hawkins and Lynette Hawkins-Stevens.
Oh, happy day.
We'd like to welcome each and every one of you tonight to the episode, The Power and the Glory, Music of the Black Church, with the ubiquitously talented Tina Fabrique, whose career in the entertainment theater world has spanned many different genres. And this episode, we're going to be discussing many of the different facets of her career. Hopefully you'll learn a lot about her and you'll enjoy yourselves. So just sit tight, and in a moment, everything's going to be all right.
Oh, happy day. When Jesus was. Oh, when it was. When Jesus was. He washed every one of my sins away.
Welcome everybody to Odds and Ends Gospel and Jazz. And tonight I have one of my dear friends and a colleague, a multifaceted, extremely talented woman, Tina Fabrique. From her roots in Harlem and facing single motherhood and growing, she has performed in recording studios, Broadway. She's done shows like Gospel at Clonas, Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Glass Menagerie, and she was honored to have received the Kevin Kline Award and Florida's Carbonell Award for her performance as Ella Fitzgerald, a show that had arrangements done by Danny Holgate, and the show was actually built around her. She created the role. Her television performances include Blue Bloods, New Amsterdam, and she was chosen to sing the original voice for The Reading Rainbow. She was also pleased and honored to sing the title song for the award-winning film Mad Hot Ballroom. She can sing jazz, Broadway, gospel. I mean, she can go anywhere. But before I bring her on, we want to show you a piece of her work. So sit tight.
In my book of memories, there's so much love on every page. How I love to reminisce and to see your smiling face. When I took my first step, you guided me all the way. When I was sweet 16, you gave me my first bouquet. Oh, mama, mama, how I wish I could kiss your face once more, or hear you say, what are you crying for? No matter where I am, you'll be in my heart always. Happy Mother's Day. Oh, in my book of memories, there's pictures of my wedding day, when I gave you a rose from my very special bouquet. Oh, mama, mama, how I wish I could kiss your face once more, or hear you say, what are you crying for? No matter where I am, the place. I'll kiss your face, give you the rose I saved, and say Happy Mother's Day.
That's a wonderful song, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to the immense talents that Tina Fabrique has.
Oh,
So I'm so glad to have you on because me and you've been talking for years, and finally here we are. I mean, me and you, we actually played together in Milton Tillman's The Divas.
yes, I remember that. Thank you so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah.
This is such a pleasure.
Well, I was really enamored also because Danny Holgate was also my mentor, and at one time Danny Holgate was like the main African American arranger for Broadway,
Yes,
and
he
he
was.
arranged all that stuff for you with Ella. How did that
Yes.
come about? Did he approach
Well,
you?
well, this is the way it went. There's a guy named Rob Ruggiero. He's the artistic director of Theater Works, which
Right.
is in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut. And he had the idea to do a show about Ella. And at that point, he and Danny had worked together on a couple of other projects.
Okay.
So lo and behold, I'm doing a show at Hartford Stage, and he shows up, but it's a gospel show. I'm doing Crowns. So he comes over and he says, "Look, I hear that you do a mean Ella Fitzgerald. All I want to hear you do is scat How High the Moon, and we'll start working tomorrow." And I did, and we did. It was all Danny's fault.
Well, I've been hearing a whole lot of hoopla about the show and how you were getting rave reviews everywhere it went. But with the passing of Danny Holgate, does that end everything, or can it still go on without his presence?
Well, I have been given permission by Danny's estate and his wife, Gail Nelson, to do the show at any point that somebody really wants to do it,
Right.
and I'll be happy to do it. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. Oh, I love that picture, Danny, because it's 22 songs and dialogue. There is a storyline, and so you're acting and singing, and everything is happening in 2.5 hours. So you're really on stage and never leave. But it was the most satisfying thing I've ever had to do.
Are you saying there's no first and second act? It's straight through?
Well, no, it's a first and second act, but the whole first act you're there, and the whole second act you're there. You don't get a break to go off for something else to happen. So 22 songs later, but it's wonderful. It's a wonderful piece. I was very proud of it.
Sure, Ella Fitzgerald is definitely in the pantheon of stars of jazz. Her scat singing, along with John Hendricks and many others, Eddie Jefferson, is something that musicians would actually study her scat singing. If you could play it on a horn, it's like wonderful,
Well,
Now-
the thing about the scat singing, which a lot of people ask me how I learned the scat singing on the show, is that I treated it like a lyric. I learned it like a lyric, and that way it was always in my head as though I was saying words. Boy, 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 like that. So you think about it as words. And I learned all of her scats verbatim.
Wow.
That was what Danny said we needed to do in order for it to be, have the value that it had.
To be authentic.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, you also performed in Bubbling Brown Sugar.
Yes.
Danny Holgate also, from what I understand, did arrangements for that show as well.
Oh, yes. Danny was the premier conductor and arranger on Broadway for an awfully long time for all the African American shows that came through.
He gave me my start.
Yes, he gave a lot of people. Zane Mark, Zane Mark, right? He gave him his start. In fact, Zane spoke at Danny's memorial service.
Yeah.
It was and it was very emotional to hear him talk about how, how Danny really took him under his wing.
Right. And you also work with Zane Mark, I believe, in Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk.
Yes, indeed. He was a music director, and we had a great time doing that.
Right. Danny prepared him well as he did me and you. I mean, everybody that touched Danny or Danny touched, they grew and expanded, because of that. Now tell me, how was it working in ragtime?
Well, that was very interesting. I actually went into the studio with the writers of Ragtime, um, Stephen and his writing partner were looking for a treatment for the songs. Even Flaherty were looking for a treatment of the songs before they put the book together. And the book, of course, is the dialogue and the storyline. So we went into the studio and we were asked to just sing the big numbers, and Billy Porter was one of the singers on that project.
What about Brian Stokes Mitchell? Was he in it at that time?
Brian was in the actual play when it opened, but this was long before it was even opened. They went into the studio and wanted to hear how the arrangements sounded. So we went in and sang the arrangements for the longest time. And once they put the book with that, the show opened, but I was out doing How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying.
Okay.
Playing Miss Jones, and they wanted me to come in, but I was out there doing this wonderful role, and it was another year. So once I came back and I did Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, I wound up doing Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, and rehearsing Ragtime to go into it.
Wow. Whoa.
It was a crazy time doing two shows, because once you rehearse all of that, there was a lot of choreography. It's a big show, Ragtime. You had over 50 people on that stage.
I was moved. I cried.
And I did the big gospel number at the end of the first act, and I was Sarah's friend, But in doing Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, it closed on, say, a Sunday, and I, after a couple of weeks of rehearsal, went into Ragtime on that Tuesday.
Wow. Whoa.
Yeah, it was really crazy.
That is incredible. When you were doing How to Succeed in Business, was Matthew Broderick in that?
Yeah, what happened was I auditioned for the road company, which was Ralph Macchio's company.
Okay.
He'd always wanted to do it.
Was that the Karate Kid?
But at the same time, Lilius White
Ooh.
was going on vacation from the Broadway show. So after I got the tour, after I auditioned and got the role, they brought me to replace Lilius as she went on vacation for 2 weeks.
Okay.
So that's how I happened to work with Matthew, because he was the Broadway company and Ralph was the touring company.
I see. Now I see behind you, you have a poster, The Wiz.
Yes.
And I know you did The Wiz. Was Stephanie Mills in it at that time?
Well, Stephanie was doing the Broadway company. She was still there. This was the first national company that I did. And first national really does mean that it's tailored just like the Broadway.
Yes.
Everything is the same except the actual actors. So I came actually to replace Peggy Blue.
Whoa.
As Aunt Em and Glenda.
Okay. And I think you had Carl Hall in that as well, right?
Oh, yes. Carl came and replaced Kamal Scott during the run.
Kamal.
Oh, Kamal was so wonderful, too. Yeah. And I met Carl Hall when I was 18 years old in one of these situations where I was called upon to sing in a gospel group. We were at this little church. And at the time, Carl Hall was singing with a great, wonderful recording gospel group called the Raspberry Singers.
Ohio.
Yes, and they were all countertenors. I've never heard voices like that. So he came, one of the people in the group that I was singing with knew him. So he came down and he heard us and he said, "Oh, you ladies are wonderful." And he shook my hand. He says, "I'm going to see you again." And sure enough, we saw each other again in theater.
Yeah, I would say also Carl Hall and Lee Truesdale.
Yes.
Were two of New York's finest falsetto. They had mastered that art of singing falsetto, which is a dying art, it seems.
Well, they call it countertenors because actually that that head voice it kicks in much later in their voices than other people. Their chest voice stays way up there. And so he could sing anywhere. He could just, he could sing in a woman's soprano. He could sing in an alto. He could sing as a tenor. He could do anything. Countertenor covered so much territory.
Sure. I mean, today we have singers like Philip Bailey and Earth, Wind and Fire, kind of The Moments, Ray Goodman and Brown, the Delphonics, who sang in that type of style. But Carl,
and Smokey Robinson, yeah,
of course. Now, what about Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat? How was that for you?
Well, that was one of my first regional musicals that I did. It was done out of town at the Melody Top in Milwaukee, and I played the narrator, and it was on Broadway at the same time. So we were a summer stock company that went and did that. I loved the music. I loved the character. And it was really one of the first, besides Bubbling Brown Sugar, that I got to do that was on Broadway, but that was also, a production that was being done somewhere in another theater in another city.
Did you have any union problems or after problems with these shows? You were pretty cool.
I joined Equity as soon as I could. I wasn't playing because I knew that a lot of the good roles and good touring companies and Broadway would be requiring or look for people who were union members. Right. And as soon as I did Bubbling Brown Sugar, I joined. It was no problem. You pay as you go, but it's one of the most wonderful things, and I never regret doing it. I love it.
Was it very expensive back then to join AFTRA?
Well, God, not as much as it is now, from what I understand, But I joined SAG later. Equity, Actors Equity was my first union to join, and then I joined SAG AFTRA. And SAG and AFTRA were two separate unions at that time.
One is kind of for actors, and the other one is kind of for like vocalists or something, or singers.
Well, now that they're together, there's not much, it all goes under the same heading. But at one point, SAG itself was more for actors, and AFTRA was for radio artists. So you were doing stuff in the studio and stuff like that. It was just that separation, but now it's all under one heading.
Wasn't there a dilemma at one point? You can't get a SAG card without being in the union, but you can't be in the union. It was like some kind of,
Well, there had to be a parent union, I believe. And to be honest with you, I think my parent union was AGVA, AGVA, which was real tired, It was not the greatest. But when I became a member of AGVA, when I was singing at Radio City Music Hall as a soloist.
Really?
I sang at Radio City Music Hall from 1972 to 1979.
In the Christmas show?
In the Christmas show, in the Easter show, in the summer show. And it allowed me to be home with my boys, because those runs were fairly long, And I was married but separated, so I was doing everything myself.
Sure.
And doing 4 shows a day at Radio City Music Hall. And one of the things I'll never regret it because it really builds up your chops.
Right.
When you do solo,
7 days a week.
Yeah. Sometimes it's 7, depending. If you're doing a soloist situation, they will not tape you. You sing everything live every show. And I did Donna Summer's Last Dance was one of the last things I did there in 78. And it was live every show. And that little stage extension that comes out into the audience.
Wow.
Well, that's where, you started out on the stage and then you ran around that little stage projection as the tempo came in. And what was great was looking down at that orchestra with all those violinists and stuff. It must have been about 25 guys down there.
Or more.
Yeah. And they hired a R&B or jazz bassist to play the stuff.
Who was that? You know his name or her name?
I don't remember who it was because that was many years ago. But they'd have to hire someone outside of the regular band because it required a groove, you
That's
know.
what I'm
And they
feeling.
didn't play like that. Yeah.
So that bass player only played that one song.
Actually, he might have played a couple of other things because I had other songs, but that was my big solo. And they
Okay.
got him for that solo.
Very cool. Very cool. Now tell us a little about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Well, it was interesting. Tazewell Thompson, one of the most magnificent directors you'll ever find. He's a theater director. He works out of Arena Stage sometimes, but he does a lot of opera work.
Hmm.
I worked with him on a play called Constant Star the very first time.
Right.
Constant Star was a musical that was totally a cappella
Hmm.
with a lot of dialogue, which talked about the years where lynchings took place.
Mm.
And it talked about all of the situations that people witnessed, how people bought train tickets to go see a lynching,
It
and
was
all
entertaining.
this very serious,
Sure.
sensitive material. And so we sang, but we tuned to each other, and everything was a cappella. So once we finished that show, he asked me to do Ma Rainey's Black Bottom at Arena Stage. I didn't audition for it. And I loved it. I loved playing Ma Rainey. It was such fun. And the cast was fabulous.
Yeah. Well, Ma Rainey kind of ran neck and neck with Bessie Smith, who
Oh,
was
she
kind of
taught
considered the
Bessie a
Empress of
lot.
Blues.
Yeah,
Huh?
she taught Bessie a lot of what she knew.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
You mean,
And it's that dialogue is in the play itself. She
oh,
said, I don't care nothing about Bessie. I taught Bessie.
right.
So we know that, she gave Bessie some of her wisdom.
Yeah, give me a pigfoot.
Mhm.
Yeah, wowee. So I don't know. Now we get into the Harlem Gospel singers. How did you actually give us a story? How did you start singing gospel? Because you're so versatile.
Well, to be honest with you, my mother, who was a classical pianist, loved listening to Mahalia Jackson, Five Blind Boys, um, all of these real rich, um, older singers of gospel music before it was really called gospel. And so I listened to that as well as I listened to Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan. But every time I turned around, somebody was trying to recruit me to sing with a gospel group. And one of the reasons for that is that I was so young at the time. My parents did not want to see me singing in bars and
Hmm.
clubs and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
they would just push me to go sing with these girls. They need a lead singer in their little gospel group. And what would happen, we were living in Brooklyn at the time. There was a gospel train that came through the South and came and ended in New York. And people on that gospel train were like the Blind Boys, the Davis Sisters, Shirley Caesar, everybody you can think of. They were just wonderful. And they would do their final show at Washington Temple, which was right downtown around Atlantic Avenue. And it was a picturesque, beautiful, large church. And so we were called upon to open for this gospel train concert.
Hmm.
And we were scared,
Oh,
us young singers, we were scared because we were the locals. We were the new kids on the block. But we did hold our own and we opened for them. That happened a couple of times, a couple of years where the gospel train would come through and end up at Washington Temple. And they might start at 7 o'clock in the evening with the concert. They would not be done until probably midnight.
wow.
And people were glad to sit there in their seats. They jumped up and clapped their hands. I mean, it was all encompassing. And that stayed with me. So there was an opportunity that happened. It wasn't something I planned, but I went in to sing on a young songwriter's demo. at a studio in New York City.
Hmm.
And this was after I'd been around for a while. My career was probably 12 years, 15 years in the offing. And we were waiting for the studio to be empty and the young man to finish his recording. Well, he was sitting there with a guitar and he was really having a hard time breathing. You could hear him in between lines, catching his breath. But his music was amazing.
Hmm.
So his name was Dana Reed. And when he came out of the studio and we were getting ready to go in, I said, young man, I want you to know something. If you ever need someone to actually go in the studio and record your music for you, just give me coffee. I'll come down and sing that stuff because you got some fabulous music. And I did it. I sang 3 songs for him just to show to record labels. And lo and behold, I get a phone call from Brian Williams of Glorious Music asking me if I'd be interested in doing an album on his company.
Great.
And this was the result.
Beautiful.
He's
What was it
able.
called? What did you call the album?
He's able.
Okay.
And I co-wrote 3 of the songs. I was very excited about that.
Well,
And the songwriting came
right.
only because of the different projects. Like Happy Mother's Day, I wrote that.
Okay.
And it came out of my co-writer and I talking about what her childhood was like and stuff. And she inspired me. And I wrote it, and Shelton Beckton played that beautiful piano for
I
me.
played with him also, Sheldon Beckett and
Yes.
Joseph Joubert.
Yes, that Joseph. Well, Joseph Joubert and I go back to me doing demos for New York Community Choir. I don't know if you remember them.
Oh, I do, yeah.
Yes. So I would sing on the demos, and Joseph would do the accompaniment. And I also did demos for Revelation, Benny's other
Benny
group.
Diggs.
Yes, Benny
Yeah, I
did.
play for them, sure.
Yeah, so I have like this terrific relationship, long term with Joseph. He'll say, "Oh yes, I've known Miss Tina a long time."
And now
It's
Joseph
just
Joubert doing all
fabulous.
the Broadway stuff.
He does everything.
He's also a classically trained pianist as well.
Yes, he is just absolutely amazing. A kind, classy, sophisticated young man who can do anything musically.
Yes. Now, ironically, from the time you performed in Brooklyn, you eventually did gospel at Colonus, and you actually were performing with, I think, the Blind Boys of Alabama, right?
Yes. I actually did understudy. There's 2 sisters in the production on Broadway that ran for about a year and a half, and they were the Steel Singers, and they're from Minneapolis. So I came in and understudied the 2 of them, but the run didn't go that long, so I never got to go on. But when they got the deal to do the Delacorte, which was only about 3, maybe 4 years ago, they called upon me, and I came in and did the Delacorte, which was so wonderful. That music is great.
I also understand that you told me you were a very spiritual woman. We talked about that. Kind of like my family. In my household, my mother's very gospel oriented and very religious. It's like on Sunday, my father would say, "You don't have to go to Sunday school, but if you don't go to Sunday school, you got to stay in all day. You just go to school Monday." So you got up and you went to Sunday school. You did it. And we would go out and play ball or play basketball. But you said you felt a calling, because I understand you're doing a show at Flushing Town Hall on February 24th.
Yes.
Power and the Glory, Music of the Black Church. You told me you felt a calling to do this show because you felt you wanted to give something to people in these unprecedented times of depression and sadness.
Yes, exactly. Every now and then I'm called upon to sing some gospel at like a memorial service. Mickey Grant, the wonderful Mickey Grant. I sang for her memorial.
Yes.
And so I'm called upon to do that. But right now, I did Flushing Town Hall with the big band. several years ago. And so I thought I might be coming back to do something like this. But when I got the request to do this,
Hmm.
I really feel there is a reason for it. I really think that if we can draw upon the joy, the spiritual connection, the fact that you get a feeling of absolute stability from knowing that you can look to someone other than yourself to bring you joy and to add to your life. I think the music, gospel music, does that.
Yes. Well, I call it the power and the glory because it has a thread that connects African Americans from slavery and spirituals all the way up to now. The spool of thread just keeps unwinding, and the wine-ins, Shirley Caesar,
Yes.
Hezekiah Walker, Kirk Franklin, and yourself, you're keeping the tradition
Yeah,
together.
I believe that anybody that embraces uh, gospel music has to understand and relate to the importance that the Black church played all the time as we evolved as a people here in this country.
Right.
Because there were times when just hearing up above my head, I hear music in the air. That might be somebody saying, Underground Railroad, we're going to be coming out on top.
Right.
It was always a message.
The
There was
hidden
always
messages,
something
reading the
connected.
water.
Yes. And the Black church has been the focus of many communities in black communities around the country. In many instances, it's the one place you can go when you move into this community or this area that you can connect with people, you
Right.
know. And sometimes those churches have access to getting kids all kinds of good connections with good schools in the area. Many of them are doing programs to enlighten these young people and help them choose a good college. They help people many times to secure homes.
Yes.
You know, Abyssinia has a program like that, you know, and I think that it's always been the center of a Black community has been the church.
Well, yes, and it also was one of the few places that slaves could kind of congregate and release themselves.
Yes,
It's kind of analogous to me, like in Congo Square in New Orleans,
yes,
in
I've
the
been there.
afternoon where the slaves just dance and just go and just be yourself. You
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would like also, you have a lot of great musicians and singers coming up on this show at Flushing Hall. Is it about 5 to 7 people on stage with you?
Yes, actually, I have a wonderful band, and the young man who's my music director, Anthony Evans, he was the music director for the Harlem Gospel Singers tour.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes, and my friend and producer of that, Roseanne Kirk, helped to put a lot of that stuff together for many years with Queen Esther Marrow,
Oh, yeah.
about 26 years, I believe, and
Okay.
toured all over the world. Went to Europe every year. So I went along with that, and it was a wonderful thing to be a part of. So I have people like Anthony Evans. I have Cholu Gatewood, who is a wonderful bassist that we toured together. Bernard Davis, wonderful
Great
drummer.
drummer.
Yes, great drummer. We've worked together a lot. We
Yeah.
have. And the singers I have are Teresa Gedison, Lawan Castidi, and Keith Fluid. And they work with everybody. Roberta Flack. They've sung behind Valerie Simpson. They work behind a lot of big names. And I'm just thrilled.
Hmm. So you say you feel it's going to be a very powerful presentation.
I think so. I wanted to do something special. I know that I probably could have, just had piano and, did a few of the older hymns or something, but I wanted to vary the gospel styles, do
So
something
you're doing traditional gospel as well as some contemporary.
temporary. Yes. And I think to do that, you do need to have a full rhythm section.
Sure.
And you do need to have some seasoned background singers because a lot of that stuff is lifted,
Yes.
vocally, So I believe that it'll do a nice cross section. I have friends who are from North Carolina, when they heard that I'm doing some gospel, they wanted to know if I was going to do some of that, that long meter.
Yeah.
You ever play long meter gospel?
Sure.
And louder.
Yeah.
Oh, and everybody joins in, and she's a young woman, but
That's
she
right.
has a real connection to that kind of
And
music.
that stuff comes from the field hollers.
Yes,
That players do.
exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
what you're doing also by doing this show and singing those type of songs, we're actually paying homage to Thomas Dorothy.
Yes.
Dorothy, who's considered the father of black gospel music, and
Hmm.
Mahalia Jackson, who was his demonstrator. He would play songs and she would sing his songs. So it's a great thing.
Yes, I love the idea of presenting stuff that was considered your staple, stuff that all of that other stuff comes from,
Yeah.
and then do, some stuff with, the combination of the two of the day kind of gospel that's more kind of related to, I guess, R&B lightly, but all of that is gospel music, and it's evolved.
Yeah. And I would say this, there was a point in the recording industry, probably 30 or 40 years ago, where you would say mostly all of the black singers who were the top singers then, they all came out of the church. You could hear it. Patti LaBelle,
Yes,
Al Green,
yes.
Natalie Cole. I mean,
Sam Cooke.
Sam Cooke. I mean, come
Woo!
on.
He was my favorite. When we did that gospel train opening in Brooklyn, and I was a real young girl, he was still singing with that group.
Sure.
Oh my goodness. And he would rear back with that microphone. He had this little choreography he would do. The Soul Stirrers, honey.
I was
You
going to
would
mention
never
those.
forget it.
Yep.
Oh,
Sure.
it was amazing. And he had a very difficult time, in some ways, some people gave him a hard time leaving the gospel
To go to secular.
behind to go to secular music.
Yeah.
And some people really did not approve of that. But he had so much, he not only wanted, and I've studied him a lot, he not only wanted to make a career of himself singing secular music, but he brought some of those groups from down south that he knew and gave them record deals
Right.
and wrote for them. He was very open and giving.
And enterprising.
Yes, very enterprising. He had
His own
one of the
publishing.
first record label of his own.
Sure. Well, that's kind of the reverse. What happened to him? And you look at Ray Charles, where Ray Charles added gospel into his, and people thought that was blasphemous. How dare you,
Yeah, I think that we have to understand that the music is based in love.
Mm-hmm.
It is based in one's experience on this earth. And I really think that when it's done, and I thought Ray Charles always did respectful references to whatever he did that was gospel sounding. It was nothing, blasphemous about it. But I think we have to recognize the fact that the music is the music. It comes from the heart. It comes from the soul. Its roots are where they're from. And you have to learn to accept that for what it is and not judge.
Right. I want to ask you some other questions because we do, with Andrew Kozlowski and Giovanni, we have the Josephine Foundation. Do you have, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to younger people who are trying to move ahead with their careers and singing, dancing, acting? What would you suggest? Because there's a very different game out there now than it was when you and I started.
That's true. I mean, our learning ground or our training ground was the clubs and, even the community centers. If we lived in the project, you could go sing something at the community center.
And you did the projects, right?
Yeah, I lived right there at 115th Street, in those houses there between 115 and 112.
Right.
And we used to do things at the community center. And I think what has to happen nowadays, a lot of these very young kids, they actually are going on and videotaping themselves and putting it on, some kind of platform. And they get a lot of views and people pick them up. And sometimes they put them on a TV show or something. So I guess that's one way of doing it. But I feel if you're serious about the arts and you really have a dream and you really want to focus and study seriously, I would say try to get into, if it's acting, try to get into a good acting school. HB Studios is very reasonably priced. You can go in there and study comedy. You can go study drama. You can learn how to write your own piece. I think you have to do the same thing when it comes to being a musician. You need to try to take lessons, and you can get stuff for free these days if you're, a community person. There's somebody that'll come over there and teach you something. But I think you need to seriously embrace learning your craft. That's very, very important. Take it seriously and learn how to do the very best that you can with it, because you never stop learning.
Of course.
I don't care how many years you do it, you never stop learning. Also, I would say be prepared, because your opportunities can come like that. You could hear from someone that they're looking for a replacement on Broadway for a particular show, and they need a tap dancer, and you study tap, you go to class. Go to class.
And that might be the beginning of your entire career. That one, yeah.
And it's happened to so many that I know. Just be and be able to be flexible. In situations where you're learning how to conduct yourself in a theater setting, for instance. Listen to the stage manager. Have respect for those who are over you, who are teaching you while you're being a part of these productions. I would say those are some of the main things. Also, you better learn how to do a self-tape with your phone or your computer, because that's what they're asking for now.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to photograph or videotape yourself reading lines for an audition or something like that. You got to really get familiar with this stuff, the virtual world.
Yes. Very good pieces of advice. One more thing I wanted to say also. Do you remember a club in New York City many years ago called Green Street?
Oh, yeah. I worked there a long time.
I had a friend of mine who says he was a music director, a guy named Benny Key.
Oh, I loved Benny.
Yes.
Well, Benny played for me when I was up there. Leah Sutton was a lady who now lives in Florida, very dear friend,
Okay.
who cast that room upstairs. They also had something downstairs too, but that didn't seem to be as regular, but upstairs at Green Street, there was always someone singing up there, and they were always fabulous singers.
Oh, yeah.
And Benny Key was a wonderful accompanist. I
played with him for many years until his death,
Yes. Oh, I was so sad to hear that he passed away.
Oh, yeah. Me too. So one more thing. What else is on your agenda besides the show at Flushing Town Hall?
Well, actually, when we closed down for the pandemic, we were working on something called based on The Most Happy Fella, which was a standard musical. It had been on Broadway many years ago. But Daniel Fish was the director.
Yes.
He had the vision. He did Oklahoma on Broadway as well. And he had the vision to do The Most Happy, not dealing with the storyline, which is about a man ordering a mail order bride. And he was Italian, and he wanted her to come, and he would marry her, and she'd live out her life happy and all that stuff. He didn't want to deal with the story, but the music he loved. So he got 8 very different voices. People like myself, Mary Testa. Just big voices, very, very different from each other. And we were working on coming in to Broadway. We were going to go to Bard University, which we did. We did that last year. We did a concert just to hear the string and horn arrangements. Oh, it just sounded fabulous. And so now we're supposed to be going back to Bard, rehearse and stage it, and get it ready to do something very soon.
You mean when the pandemic lessons?
Well, I don't even know if Daniel Fisher's going to wait for that.
Okay.
He's already said, what are you doing April, May, June? So we're going to be working on The Most Happy. So whatever happens, happens. When we did it out at Bard University, they were very careful. They had everyone tested the PCR test before you got up there.
Yes.
You stayed in your hotel room. Everything was outdoors as far as the actual performance. Mm-hmm. And you wore a mask when you went inside. So I suppose even if the pandemic is still happening and they want to develop the piece, they'll do the same thing.
Yes. Or he could actually, if he wanted to, have it maybe filmed or taped and use it some other kind of way. But I think he wants it to be a live experience.
Oh, he's chomping at the bit. Okay. He is so excited about doing this. And the New York Times actually showed up unexpectedly and wrote about it. And he didn't quite understand. He was a purist for the show. He's like, oh, no, this is not what I know, The Most Happy Fella. But he was curious and interested as to what Daniel Fisher is going to do next with the piece. So there's some interest, Also, I was going to Merrimack Theater, which is kind of upstate New York. Relating back, I did a very Ella Christmas virtual show from TheaterWorks for the last 2 years. They want to do it live, so I'll be there for Christmas for 4 weeks.
Okay. Very, very cool. So listen, this has been a wonderful journey.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been so pleasant. I love it.
I've learned so much more about you and how expansive your career has been and how fortunate you've been as well, and talented. These things wouldn't have happened if you didn't have the talent. So we got to be clear about that. You just don't get called because if you got called and you couldn't deliver, I don't care who you are, you can't deliver, you're out.
And I look upon it as being very blessed every day. I really do. It's a blessing.
Yes. So we're going to wrap it up now. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
When we come back, because there's still so much more to talk about your other lives before all this and during this, okay?
Oh, so I'd love to
come on and granting us this beauty. And remember, it's all about
love.
That's right. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you to everyone for watching Odds and Ends Gospel and Jazz. I want to thank you all for tuning in. We hope you had a wonderful time on this journey through the life and talent of the supremely gifted Tina Fabrique, and we hope to see you next week. So, good night and stay bright. Hallelujah.
To know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow. I can be anything. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading